Good morning, Mr. Gurry. You are the Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization for 2 years now. Let me start with the first question on the proliferation of IP regimes. As you know, there's more and more discussions taking place on IP rights outside WIPO. How does your organization feel about that?
Well, look, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that there is something of a crisis in multilateralism. Our capacity as an international community to reach agreements has been reduced, and we see that across the board. It's not just intellectual property. We see it in many sectors. And the consequence of that, in a world that is very fast-moving and in a subject matter that's very fast-moving like intellectual property, is that states look for other opportunities to reach agreement, because the subject matter continues, of course. The world is not going to stop if multilateral negotiations are not successful. So they look for other opportunities, and this is the explanation of so many bilateral free trade agreements where intellectual property is a major component. It's the explanation of plurilateral accords like the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, ACTA. It's the explanation of a greater focus in regional fora on intellectual property or other subject matter. And it's the explanation of the G20 and the G8 and the G this and the G that. So the consequence is that we are slower at reaching our agreements. More is happening outside because the world is faster, and we have to find a way to bring the two together.
Several emerging economies are becoming more and more innovative. How does that change the political dynamics in the area of IP?
Yes, I'm sure it will, undoubtedly. We've seen it. I mean, the most notable example, of course, is China. And we've seen it within the international patent system. China move into now 5th place last year. It files more international patent applications than France or the United Kingdom, for example. This current year, it may pass the Republic of Korea and move into 4th place. The Republic of Korea itself is a relatively recent phenomenon in this area. So now we have, if you look at the top 5 filers of international patent applications as a measure of the production of technology, and it's a good measure of that, you have the United States of America, Japan, Germany, Republic of Korea, China. So 3 of the first 5 are from Asia, of course, and 2 of them at least are emerging economies, or China is. We see similar but less pronounced at this stage developments in the case of India and Brazil. That certainly will change in the future. What does all this mean? I think one of the things it means is that our political architecture, which was designed in the post-war period, is in many respects out of skew, out of kilter with economic reality. And so there will be a process of bringing the political architecture, the way countries group themselves, the way we consider the world. We perceive it as developing countries on the one hand and industrialized countries on the other. That is far too simplistic. And it's changed as a result of, as you said, the emergence of these new economies. So there will be a process, I think, of slowly making the political architecture conform to the economic reality.
Let's deal with the diversity of informational, cultural, and knowledge system. Is it important to maintain such diversity, or is uniformity and universality an objective that WIPOs strive to achieve?
Well, look, I'll take the question in 2 ways, if I may. Of course, we live in a globalized world, and to some extent, you have to have certain functional standardization across the world. Let's take the example of the mobile telephone. The latest generation of mobile telephone has 5,000 patents in it, over 5,000 patents, belonging to over 50 enterprises around the world. Yet we all would like to get off the plane wherever we land and be able to use our mobile telephone. And we expect that. We expect the global use and the capacity to use globally technologies. That can only happen with international cooperation, because each of those 5,000 patents is a separate territorial title. So to some extent, yes, I think that there is a necessity to have some functional standardization internationally, which means a convergence, if you like, of certain standards, functional standards, while at the same time respecting each country's own capacity to deal with the areas of public policy that are very precious to it in accordance with national policy. So that's one aspect of the question. I think the other aspect of the question is the different regimes, as you've mentioned, that are emerging. Well, there I think, we have come from a situation in which we had one patent system that applied to everything from agricultural machinery to molecular biology. And I think as we see the component of knowledge in production expand and become more important and more economically valuable, we will see a more sophisticated system of knowledge rights emerge. I think that's inevitable. The trick will be how to maintain differentiation where it's needed economically, because we're dealing with a tool of economic policy. We want to achieve certain policy outcomes in the economy, notably incentivizing innovation. We want to achieve that. How do we do that while retaining a simple, usable system that nevertheless respects differentiation? So let me give you, if I may, just one example of it. In the context of patent reform discussions in the United States of America, there was a big difference between, on the one hand, the IT industry, information technology industry, on the other hand, the pharmaceutical industry. The information technology industry was arguing at one stage that you should not be able to get an injunction as a remedy for patent infringement, that is, stopping the use of the invention as a court order. Why not? Because we now are in a networked society, and an injunction here can bring down technologies right down the track. So it can bring down a whole series of technologies within the networked economy. And the injunction, according to some of them, was therefore too powerful an instrument. On the other hand, the pharmaceutical industry said that is the essence of our protection. If we don't have that, we have nothing. We must have the injunction. So maybe they were both right, is the answer, rather than one or the other. And so maybe we will need further differentiation, sectoral differentiation in the patent system and in intellectual property and knowledge rights in the future as the knowledge economy becomes, I think, more and more sophisticated.
How do you assess public support for IP protection?
Look, I think it's a difficult challenge in any case. It's a difficult challenge. Why? Because what we are arguing for in intellectual property is a long-term advantage in return for a short-term disadvantage. Now, most people consider the short-term to be, much more important to them. So the long-term advantage that we seek, of course, is a dynamic culture, in the case of copyright, or innovation to satisfy all our social and economic needs, in the case of technology. The short-term disadvantage is you have to pay for that. You have to assure a decent living for artists, performers, musicians, and composers and writers. You have to assure a decent compensation for investment, in the huge investment in research and development. That's not necessarily an easy argument to understand popularly in the community generally. So I think we always have a communication problem with intellectual property. But if we go back to why we have it, it's a little bit easier. Why do we have it? Well, we all want music, we all want literature, we all want cinema, and so on. And we want innovation to meet the challenges that we're facing as a society. There is a communication difficulty in this respect that we need to continually work on, I think. Nevertheless, that said, of course you need a balanced system. Intellectual property is all about balance. It's at the base a contract between an individual and society. So you need to find the balance between providing the encouragement for innovation, the incentive to innovation, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's not much good in having innovation if it can't be shared by the community. So in a certain sense, the system says it's going to be shared because the right is limited. So after that, it is of course shared. But maybe we need to find mechanisms also to make it better shared during that time. So there's this balance between incentivizing by an exclusive right, the creation of knowledge, and sharing knowledge, diffusing knowledge. That's what intellectual property is about. That's the challenge. That's the discussion, I think. So, yes, some are going to say the balance is skewed one way or the other, and that is going to be our eternal discussion in the area, I think.
So my last question, and I could not prevent myself from asking you this. Technology and business models, you know, they evolve much faster than legislation. How does WIPO deal with this?
Yeah, well, this is our problem of multilateralism, of course, going back to where we started. In a sense, we have terribly cumbersome, slow multilateral processes for reaching agreement. And while we're doing that, we are watching the world disappear in the distance at a speed that is, much, much, much quicker. So that is our problem. It's not just a multilateral problem. I think it's a problem at the level of the nation as well, because national legislatures face the same problem. Very fast-moving technology cycles, changing business models in response to the technological change. How to cope with this? They're trying to legislate for a moving target. I think one, and it's a complex problem, of course, but I think one element to it is that we are going to be relying on practical initiatives as vehicles for international cooperation to a much larger extent than we did in the past. So in the past, of course, the treaty was the sacred means of assuring international cooperation. And there's nothing wrong with treaties, it's just they take a very long while to conclude. On a fast track, 5 years to conclude it. And then it doesn't come into force automatically across the whole world. Everyone has to sign on, and that process may take 10, 20 years. With a global medium like the internet, for example, that's a very unsatisfactory methodology, unfortunately. So I think one of the things that the world is telling us is that platforms can be much more important than treaties. Look at Twitter, look at Facebook, look at other social media. Could you have brought about social change as they have by a treaty? No. It is a technology which has enabled an international change of behaviour. Whether that change of behaviour is good or bad, that's a different question. But the method has been a platform. So I think that what we are seeing is the emergence of an increased number, perhaps, of public-private partnerships using platforms to try to achieve policy outcomes that once we may have tried to achieve through a treaty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurry, for being with us, and we look forward to your presentation next Tuesday at the Institute.